gentlemen, and I'm very honoured to be here in this city with such wonderful planning, which is such a contrast to London. Here, the neat radial plan in contrast to the muddle of London. London is a city which has just grown by adding extra pieces of villages. As they've extended, they've created one large metropolis. It's a very complex city, very different to the rational outline of a city you have here, and this is also reflected in the processes often that happen in terms of creating the city. So what I wanted to talk about was not the global aspect of civil society, but actually how civil society can impact on physical change in cities. Clearly, because London is a global city, it has an impact from the rest of the world. But I'm going to talk very specifically about the role of the New London Architecture Centre and other areas where I'm involved in the civil society in bringing the attention of change to a wider public. The New London Architecture Centre was set up just 10 years ago now. We were set up at the time of the announcement of the Olympic Games, and also the next day when we had terrorist attack in the London Underground. So we went from one day, this great celebration, we were having the Olympics, to the next day when suddenly we had an attack on the city, which somehow to me reinforce what we were hearing yesterday from Mr. Barber about the resilience of cities. Cities continue on despite issues that might impact on it over its history. They continue on, and that was a real lesson, that you have celebration and you have tragedy, but the city and the spirit of the city continues. So we've been going 10 years, a decade now. We are a membership organization, but we bring together all the various organizations which are involved in the creation and change in the city. Our focus is this model of London, where we track all the changes that take place, and we update the model when there are new proposals from developers for things that will change the shape of the city. And we have a lot of change going on at the moment because London is growing as a city. We, in the post-war period, we reduced to about 7.5 million. From the mid-90s, we started growing again. We've just reached 8.6 million, which was the same number that we were in the late 1930s. And by 2030, we expect to be 10 million, and then maybe 11 to 12 million by 2050. So continual growth. We're also a historic city, and so major growth like this has a real impact on the way the city is formed. Where do we put all these houses we have to build? We have to build something over 40,000 new homes each year in order to just to keep up with the growth, let alone improving the quality of life. So where do we put all this? This is a key debate, and this is a key debate which the New London Architecture and other organizations I'll talk about in a minute come together to create this civil society where we can debate what is happening. So here you see the new towers which are taking place in the City of London. Some of these are now completed, some of them are about to start, and some of them, as happens within the economic cycle, like this one, have now been abandoned, and a new design will be put in place. So we track the changes which are happening, and we involve citizens in the discussion. We also welcome visitors from around the world, from mayors of Chinese cities to tourists to school children, to see what is happening to their city. We have a series of temporary exhibitions which look at changes taking place. This is called Planes, Drains and Trains, which is about the new infrastructure which is happening in London, because in order to cope with the huge growth, we have to build new railway lines, we have to improve the underground system, we need more buses, we need more trams. So a lot of impacts like that also have an effect on how citizens respond to change. But recently we held some research into what was happening to London skyline, because one of the impacts of having a more dense city means that you make choices of where you build. Do we build a city which is focused on the centre? Do we increase the sprawl of London out into the suburbs or into the region? And one of the things that is happening at the moment is a lot of tall buildings are being proposed, and these are some of the designs that are happening. We discovered that there are somewhere around 280 new towers over 20 floors high being constructed or in the planning system in London at the moment. And this was something that actually people didn't know about. Despite the fact that there is local consultation on tall buildings, as far as the wider impact in London, people, the general public, the civil society, were not aware of the change that was taking place to their city. So if you look at this, this is a view in 2006, looking at the River Thames, looking to the south bank of the Thames is to the right, and that is the City of London with the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. The dome of St. Paul's Cathedral is a protected view, which I'm sure something Dr. Barker will be talking about later this morning. And this is what is proposed in terms of new towers. So you can see that the view of London, the historic view, will change quite dramatically over that period of time. So for people to discover this was something of a shock, and there has been considerable reaction to the impact. Not everyone hated the idea of tall buildings, but actually what had gone wrong was that somehow people didn't know about it. These were decisions which were being taken in a small room in City Hall, that this should all happen. And so we feel our role is to make sure that people know about these, that it forms a part of a discussion. Even to the east of London, where we have the major financial centre of Canary Wharf, which already has towers going up to 40 odd floors. There is major development proposed, and there, if all the buildings that are suggested happen, this will be the change that will take place. So again, a big change, and these are things which are essential in any civil society that is properly debated. They may be bad, they may be good, but you need to know what is happening. You need to involve the citizen in the debate and discussion about the quality of the architecture, both in terms of the way it hits the sky and also the way it hits the ground and the way it impacts on people's lives. So we had public debate about this, where we brought together deputy mayors, citizens, students, people to discuss what should happen. And that has created a general debate, which is now creating a focus where you have contrast between historic streets in East London with new development taking place very close by. And this is right at the moment. There is a big debate about this scheme, which has not yet been permitted. The mayor of the local borough is very much against it. But interestingly enough, this height is actually created by the fact that development is controlled around the rest of the site, and this is the only part where they can build tall. And getting that balance across a large-scale development like that is something which is, again, a key aspect of how we need to debate the future of development in London. And as a part of the New London Architecture Centre's role, we bring together city leaders who are involved in creating urban change. We bring them together on a quarterly basis to discuss key issues, which and it's this bringing together of people who often they ought to speak to each other regularly, but they often don't. They operate their organizations within separate silos that we feel is an important role. And we bring together experts. These are all experts in tall buildings who discuss issues to do with it. And we like to call the groups we bring together the Urban Alliance. These are people who together impact on change in the city. At one end you have politicians, other, the general public. In between, you have the professionals, the planners, the conservationists, the architects, the engineers who actually deliver that change. And bringing those people together is a key issue of delivering the right sort of information in what I see as a civil society, a civil way of delivering planning. And we have visits to areas of London, so we really get to understand the pressures that are delivering change in this area. This is the legacy of the Olympics, which is now a major regeneration part of London. We have a regular magazine which focuses on the sort of change which is taking place as well. And here you can see some of the towers which have been recently completed. And Boris Johnson, the charismatic Boris Johnson, as you heard, we work closely with him and his department to bring issues out into the public and ensure that the highest quality design, highest quality architecture is on his agenda. Doesn't always work, but we try. And we have an awards where we give prizes to the best architecture, the best design that has the most positive impact on the city generally, and we give those out at a special lunch in the Guildhall each year. So we involve ourselves very much in the quality of the new environment and bringing together all those people involved with it. But also we do look overseas. We organize regular conferences with other cities, other professionals who are facing similar problems to those that we face. So this is with planners and designers from Singapore, from Seoul, from Sydney, discussing tall buildings, and we do that in order to bring together all those issues that are common to major global cities, and we learn an awful lot from that. I've also now started to work with the London Society, because New London Architecture, we focus very much on a lot of the sort of professional aspects of what is happening. What we need are more citizens involved. The London Society, which was started by Sir Edwin Lutyens, one of the greatest architects of the 20th century, designer of New Delhi in India, amongst other places. He started it, and with a this is its slogan, which is in Latin, but which is basically says, protect the old, build in beauty, and cultivate the future. So past, present, future is really all those issues which the civil society needs to balance. So this was London in 1912, and the London Society was founded just a few years after the Metropolitan Art Society in New York, which was an organization, the Municipal Art Society in New York, which had very similar sorts of aims, and today is a very active organization. And it became particularly active at the time when there were plans to knock down Grand Central Station, and it became particularly popular when Jacqueline Kennedy got involved in campaigning for that. And so that charisma we've been hearing about, very important to actually attract and get people to really become involved, and that really set the tone for Municipal Art Society at the time. and they've been involved in a whole series of debates and discussions about supporting events like this, obviously commemorating 9/11, through to, in the same way we did in London, looking at the impact of additional, the sort of pressure on the planning system here in New York, the accidental skyline, which is happening because of the pressure of high land values, the ability to sell to global markets, very expensive apartments. The apartments up here can be sold for tens of millions of dollars, which make it worthwhile then creating what are called super slender towers. They're very elegant, but they are actually changing the face of Manhattan in a way that nobody understood was going to happen. And I think the debate about these sorts of things, important for civil society to be involved with. Back to London, the London Society, actually during the First World War, architects who didn't have any work were then, they volunteered to produce the first plan of London, the first London plan. We do them now quite regularly under the mayor, but then there was no idea about proper planning. As you can see, London is an untidy city, but this new plan started off with creating a green belt around London, connecting parks, so that this provided protection against sprawling suburbs. It was a key part of London's planning, the idea of the sort of Ringstrasse that will control development. And that has grown into now in London something which is perhaps too big. This is now London's green belt, which instead of just being a few hundred meters wide is now some up to about 15 kilometers wide. I mean, it's a large piece of real estate, you might say, which we need to debate. What do we do about this when the centre is being compressed with the additional growth of population and density? How do we deal with that? Now I'll talk about cycling advocacy, because I'm a keen cyclist, and I believe that cycling is a way of creating more civilized cities. Walking, cycling and public transport are what should make up the centre of large global cities like London, and not the motor car and not large trucks. And so we see in London a city which is dense but actually quite dangerous for cyclists, yet with the increasing density we're having to pack more and more into quite narrow, often medieval streets. How do we do that? And so 2 years ago I cycled from Portland, Oregon to New York and across Britain and also a number of cities in Europe, a group of us studying what would happen, what is happening around the world to change the nature of the relationship between people, cars, cities and streets. And one of the really interesting things about the idea of civil society was when we went to wonderful, what I call second-tier American cities. This is in Minneapolis, but in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Indianapolis. We found the same groups of active cycling organizations who were very different to the political cycling organizations that we find in the UK, who are generally very uncollaborative with the sort of political system. Here, the relationship of mayors, the not-for-profits that actually then see themselves as proactive creators of new infrastructure in cities and getting involved in the process of delivering change. So these are all the some of our riders, but also all the groups in Minneapolis. We came together to look at how they were delivering change. And We're told in London all the time that Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Copenhagen, Freiburg, just so much better than London, and Germany generally, of course, much better for cycling. And we thought we could actually learn a lot from American cities because they face very similar problems to ourselves. This is in Pittsburgh, this is in New York with Jeanette Sadiq Khan and the Paul Steely-White of the Transalt New York's campaigning organization. They work together to deliver amazing change in New York over a very short space of time. We produced a report for Boris Johnson, which he says he read, but we think it had an impact on some of the thinking that is now going into new cycling in London. And this is what was proposed recently is a new east-west superhighway which goes right across London, and this is on a motorway in West London, a major shift away from the dominance of the motor car through to the dominance of the citizen. And one of the key issues here, we have to make sure as a part of the civil society that we can balance the power of the corporations and who wish to actually stop this sort of thing happening because it's taking away some of their road. What we want to see is not taking away road. We think there needs to be a redistribution of road across the wider broad band of citizens, and because clearly cycling is much more efficient, healthy, and fair to society, and if you bring that together with more walking and public transport, you get better cities. Thank you very much.